Welcome to Behind the Scenes. I'm your host, Hector Montalvo. This show is dedicated to asking tough questions for you, the viewers. We bring you their responses and we let you decide. Joining us here today at our MCTV studios, candidate for State Senate, Sean Downing. Alongside of him, we have from Massachusetts election 2010, Rafael Batista. Welcome to the show, gentlemen.
Thank you, Hector. Hi, Hector.
Mr. Downing, tell us about yourself a little bit.
So I have a PhD in cancer genetics. I actually most recently was working at Children's Hospital doing some research into pediatric cancer. Therefore I'm not a politician, I'm not an attorney, but I basically became to the point, a lot of citizens in the Commonwealth are, is that I decided that I needed to run for office to actually try and institute change in the way our government runs.
What kind of change?
Well, for instance, I think that the state legislature has not listened to the will of the people, and that's been going on for over a decade, starting with the 2000 vote to reduce the income tax rate. And it's carried on right on through to today. So that sort of change, to actually bring the government back to the people and actually make it work for the people and not for the politicians.
How do you plan on doing that?
Well, once I'm elected, it would be to, one, create an open government. So therefore, if an open meeting law could not be established for the legislature, that I would take it upon myself to actually post on my website all of my meetings, all the minutes from those meetings, and if possible, to actually record them and actually post those up on the internet as well. So that's one. And two, to start to end the perks that state legislatures get. I don't think many people actually get the opportunity to get paid for driving to work. And state legislators actually get to double dip from that. They actually get it from their campaign funds and being reimbursed from the state. That costs the state money. And we need to reduce expenditures. The state doesn't necessarily have a revenue problem. It has a spending problem. And there is part of the spending problem is giving state legislatures perks that they just don't need, that the average citizen doesn't get. And that too, I'd also like to see local aid restored. In the past several years, local aid has been reduced by over $400 million. With the increase in the sales tax, the state has taken in an extra $2 billion. So why is it that local aid's been cut if the state is actually taking in an increased amount of money? It'd be nice to know where the money's actually going. They keep raising our taxes on Beacon Hill and reducing our services. So therefore, the money's not accounted for. And I would like to see some accountability restored to Beacon Hill so that the people can actually be best looked after.
You say the money's not accounted for. Where's the money? Where is it going?
I wish I knew.
Do you know, Rafael?
No, I don't know. I think that the voters generally, they're not averse to the legislature raising taxes when necessary for services that are critical. And so for most people, critical services include the things that happen in their towns, the school budget, the public safety, their policing budget, things of this kind. And so what legislators come to us and say, well, we're in an economic crisis, we're having trouble raising money, we need to raise the taxes, whether it be sales tax or income tax, so that we can continue to fund these critical things like the local aid. But then when voters see that their taxes were raised, the state is taking in more money than ever, and yet they're seeing their services cut back, those two stories don't match up. And then I think then voters get very frustrated and will say, well, if you're going to raise our taxes and you're not going to spend it on the things that you said, then maybe we want the taxes back the way they were. I think that a lot of this tax money does go to things which benefit very narrow special interests that give money to legislators. So there are a large number of PACs. The unions give a lot of money to our legislators. Many businesses have particular interests where they're funding things. And so we're seeing that, for example, instead of dealing with the people's business this year, the legislature's been focusing on casino issue. Well, I think we can have a debate about whether Massachusetts really needs casinos if we had nothing else to worry about. But in a time when people are really worried about their jobs, they're really worried about whether their kids are getting a proper education, they're really worried about having the municipal property taxes go up, that the legislature is focusing on things like this casino bill, which, is not really going to provide the jobs that they say. They're spending so much time on this issue with slot machines. Slot machines is not going to provide any job. That's an automatic, it's a machine, right? No one is going to be hired to run a slot machine. So why are they focusing on that? Whereas they should be focusing, I think, on the basic things that create jobs in Massachusetts, which is having a very, very high grade of education, having an educated workforce. That's sort of the key to success in this state. This brings in the types of really good jobs that we have. That's why we've got biotechnology. I mean, that's why we've got guys like Sean. He's a cancer geneticist. He's here because Massachusetts has got that kind of a workforce. We're mortgaging that away by not funding education. Over time, that's going to erode the quality of our workforce.
Yeah, and to expound on some of that is that Massachusetts actually was founded by a group of individuals who had a major emphasis on education. Massachusetts has long been a world-renowned place for education, and I think now we're seeing the deterioration of that, and it's a shame because education really is the duty of a civilized society, because that is the true way for economic mobility, for upward economic mobility, is education. Now, not necessarily a college education, because certainly members of the trades skills can actually earn quite a good living, but they also need to receive an education in that. So education really is the key to upward mobility. And if we're actually going to go backwards in educating our children, we're going to go backwards in our economy. We're going to go backwards in being able to build a large enough tax base and a job force that actually can propel us into the 21st and into the 22nd century.
How do we move forward? How do we move forward from here?
Well, and that's just it, is that, as we said, the state doesn't have a revenue problem, it has a spending problem. And it's a simple economic equation. Yes, I don't think that many citizens are opposed to paying more taxes if they're actually going to go for critical services and maintain the level of services. But really, if you hit an economic crisis, the thing is you don't go to your boss and ask for more money, or in this case, demand more money and take it. Because remember, we are the boss of our government. What you first do is look to see where you can cut wasteful spending. And I think that's what was missing from the previous budgets, is that there was no look through it to see where we could actually cut wasteful spending. So there's a twofold thing that could be done there. Let's cut some wasteful spending. Let's actually raise taxes when needed. I have actually signed the No New Tax Pledge because I believe the state does not have a revenue problem. I think that the state takes in plenty of money already.
More than ever now.
Right, and so really the money needs to be applied wisely, so that way we can ensure that the services that the state needs to provide are actually being provided.
Wasn't taxes supposed to be a temporary thing?
All taxes should be relatively temporary. For instance, when we hit our last economic crisis in the 90s, and our income tax was raised from 5%, I think, to 5.95%. That was supposed to be a temporary measure. The state legislature then never reduced the tax rate, and so it actually took a ballot initiative in the year 2000 to actually have it reduced. It passed overwhelmingly. The state legislature, the initiative actually put benchmarks as to how the tax rate was supposed to be lowered back down to 5%. But in 2002, I believe it was, the state legislature froze it at 5.3%. That was just 2 short years after the public overwhelmingly voted to have it restored to 5%. And so they maintained it at that level for nearly a decade. We hit our next economic crisis, and what do? Well, they raised our sales tax. And now they're pulling in extra revenue, but yet our services are being cut.
Well, I think what happens is that states hit a sort of economic crisis where they can't fund things that the public really wants, like education. So they'll come to the people and ask to raise the taxes, and people will be convinced by this and will have their taxes raised. As soon as that economic pressure is off and they have a surplus again, what they'll do is, instead of giving the money back to the people and say, okay, we're going back to where we were, they'll see that surplus in the budget, and they will start putting it towards other priorities that come into them for certain narrow interests. So they'll start doing these giveaways to particular programs. They'll fund these patronage jobs. They'll fund things that are expensive for the state but benefit particular interest groups. And then once that money is committed, and they've gotten a benefit from certain interest groups that keep them elected, now they can never uncommit that money again. And so that base of special interest money stays there. They can't lower the taxes. Now we hit another economic crisis. That stuff is locked in, and they have to come to us again to raise the taxes a second time. And that's where we are now. They couldn't raise the taxes a second time because the people are almost completely unwilling, or they managed some with the sales tax increase. Right?
Well, I think with the sales tax increase, I think that we saw that the people were greatly unhappy with it. You just look at the sales numbers. They dropped in Massachusetts after they passed the sales tax increase. People voted with their pocketbook. They went to New Hampshire. Sales in New Hampshire greatly increased shortly after the sales tax was passed. So people, I think, were letting the government know that was a bad thing you just did. And
I mean, that's a particular problem in this district where you're so close to the border.
Right. And that's the issue, is that you can't, if you're in a border state, you can't raise a sales tax to a point where it actually makes it much more lucrative for people to actually cross the border and actually buy another state, when the state, now Massachusetts, won't realize that sales tax revenue.
Well, what's so frustrating about what our legislators tell us is that they come to us repeatedly and they say that they're great supporters of certain things that they know we want to hear. So they'll say education is very important. That's a priority for me. They'll say the majority of jobs in the state are created by small business. That's very important to me. But then we find that year after year they're cutting local aid, they're cutting education money for our higher education, they're cutting our libraries. And at the same time, they're raising sales taxes. That disproportionately affects small business.
Massachusetts is one of the worst states in the country for a small business to actually try and do business in, partly due to the tax burden and the tax code. It needs to be reformed. It needs to be reduced. It needs to be reformed so it's much simpler for businesses to actually be able to conduct business in the Commonwealth and to hire individuals, because if the company actually is able to retain more of its money, they can hire more people. Government can't create jobs. Unless they actually are in the, in which Massachusetts they actually do, but government can only create an environment that allows small businesses to prosper, and they hire. The vast majority of Americans work for small businesses. So the government needs to create an environment in which small businesses can actually flourish and actually then hire more people. And the way you do that is by making sure that the taxes and the red tape that businesses have to go through are not so overburdensome that it's just not worth them doing business in the state.
Well, one of the problems is not just high tax rates, but tax rate stability. So if you're running a business, you make a business plan several years out. You may make an investment in equipment, in a storefront, something like that. You may mortgage yourself for that, and you're depending on a certain amount of income. If you know that that your sales tax may go up unpredictably, your income taxes may go up unpredictably, those things affect, that's risk. You may look somewhere else, or you may decide not to invest in expansion just because you're afraid, well, who knows what's going to happen? This legislature may pass a tax hike as they did this year.
What are you hearing out from your constituents that you're seeking to serve? What are their biggest issues? Well,
the first thing that I was hearing back when I was collecting signatures, and it was actually a major topic at the time, was the federal health care. It didn't really matter, I think. That wasn't something that drew down party lines. I think that I heard that from Democrats as well as Republicans, that they were really upset with the passage of the health care system. And so that was initial, and I think that a lot of that anger has faded, but I think now a lot of what I'm hearing is that people are concerned that our government, especially Massachusetts, is wasting the money. They really want to know where the money is going. And unfortunately, I don't have an answer for that. So it'd be nice to be able to, be elected and tell the individuals, look, this is where the state money is actually going. This is where it's being spent, down to the dime. And I know that there are a couple of candidates for state auditor that really want to do that, really want to make